There you go. All right, beautiful girl. There you go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you. We've got a lot of great issues to talk about. Every day I just don't even know where to go because I've got whiplash. Everything is happening at one time. What a great time to be alive. What a great, great, great time. Because all of these crises are opportunities for us to get things right, not to get things better but to get things right. I really think that needs to be the goal. Ending poverty, establishing democracy, eliminating all of the isms that keep us separated from each other. That's really the goal. So let's go there. Let's not go toward a more perfect union. Let's go toward a perfect union. How about that? Let's do that. And we can. But now we got to get through the tough stuff. We're still in the weeds, everybody. The Democrats are in disarray. Let's talk about that. Meet me on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Please meet me there right now. Like and subscribe, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. And if you would, please also go to the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. That's Facebook/Santita Jackson and Friends. Facebook/Santita Jackson and Friends. And at Santita J on X. And I'm on Blue Sky. That's right, santitajackson.bsky.social. santitajackson.bsky.social. Hey, Bernadette, how you doing? Carol, Soskin, my sister from another mister out there in the hills of Beverly. We've got a lot to talk about today. What's going on with the Democrats? I was looking at a CNN report, and their polling shows that Republicans are polling better than Democrats with the American people as opposed to those who feel that the party's on their side economically. Even with the cuts to SNAP, WIC, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, Democrats are still on the losing end. That's right. That was the sharp intake of breath. That was Ronnie Patrice. It's like sometimes we feel like we're fighting a lonely battle. But Roots Action wrote a postmortem for the campaign that 4 years later, I thought that it was a postmortem for the 2024 campaign. He said, no, we wrote this 4 years ago. Okay. Why didn't anyone take them up on it? And we've got this rash of books that are out now that are letting us know that all was not well in the Democratic camp. That the president really was struggling, and people know that from the inside. And now the latest book that's about to come out in October, his press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, said, I'm leaving the party. I've left it. I'm an independent. Now, she's not been called a blasphemer. She's had the space to do that. But the fact that she's joining the plurality of Americans, the plurality of Americans are self-declared independents, whether they tilt left, right, Democrat, Republican. I think they're just kind of tired of both parties. But for people who are holding out and in a two-party system, they're saying, okay, we've got a binary choice still. And the Democrats are supposed to be standing for the working class, working people, poor people, people who want to move the country forward. And yet they continue to lose the big races. We're gerrymandered out of power in the House of Representatives and the Senate. And the Democrats will not talk about that. David Daley's written about it in his best-selling books, Rat Effed, Unrigged. He's been telling us, look, Anti-Democratic, his new book. He's been telling us, wait a minute, this is what's happening, and this is the path back to power. So into the breach, Roots Action is at it again. They've said, look, DNC, we need a meeting. We have an emergency. You just heard what happened at the town meeting with Joni Ernst up in Iowa. Someone shouted from the crowd, hey, people are going to die. And she replied sarcastically, well, come on. And she put her hair behind her ear. Well, yeah, well, we're all going to die. And then her mea culpa was from a cemetery. Wow. So I want to know what the Democrats are doing. They just met, but it was an executive board meeting. They have not listened to the people at all. So Norman Solomon wrote, and it was published in The Guardian, Democratic Party leaders just met for the first time in months. When will they take real action? Now, mind you, this is after Roots Action immediately called after the election. We need a meeting. People, you write, with the power to change the direction of the Democratic Party, the executive committee of the DNC, met last Friday for the first time in months. In 5 months, they took no action. The party's bylaws make the executive committee, quote, responsible for the conduct of the affairs of the Democratic Party, close quote, between the meetings of the full committee, which isn't scheduled to gather until late August. That is really a year, and really it's less than a year out from the 2026 election. The 2026 election, the elections really will be starting in January. We're here. And yet there's been no real postmortem. We have a party that throughout the primary season to say the candidate that they knew was mentally addled. Yeah, Rania, it takes that kind of sharpen takes a breath. These are things that Roots Action asked for him to step aside, as he said he would do. They asked for him to do that in 2022. And they faced a reign of terror. It was awful the way they were treated. They said, it's not that we don't appreciate you, Joe, but you said you'd be a transitional figure, which means 4 years. You'll almost be 90. Why don't you take the time, step aside, and so that we can develop this bench, have a robust primary season? Okay. That didn't happen. And it seems we're seeing that Kamala Harris had all kinds of roadblocks and various forms of sabotage, quite frankly, that addled her run for the presidency. Everybody, President Trump didn't win in a landslide. In terms of the popular vote, she was within 2 percentage points of winning the election. That was it. So I've got Ronnie Patrice from the DNC, Palestinian American activist. See that keffiyeh behind you? Love it, love it, love it. Norman Solomon, we're all in solidarity here, of course. Co-founder of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, co-founder of Roots Action. Brilliant academician. He helps us to keep straight on the media, but he also is keeping us in the fight for those of us who are trying to stay in this binary system, but it's tough. You have been calling, you and Roots Action have been calling, and other progressives, but you've really taken the lead on this. I mean, we've seen you most prominently. You've been calling upon the DNC to have an emergency meeting. Now, what happened over the past few days? You said that it was the executive committee that met, but this wasn't the emergency meeting that you were calling for, Norman Solomon.
Right. The emergency meeting we're calling for is the full committee, the full DNC, 448 members from all over the country. That means geographically dispersed, people who know apparently, or we would assume their neighborhoods and the areas where they live. This is not or should not be business as usual. The DNC has its full meetings twice a year. Okay, that is business as usual. But anybody who is not, as the saying goes, under a rock knows this is not a normal time. And we have a administration in power, a regime that is savagely attacking one program after another illegally. This is, I won't go on because listeners, I think generally will be very aware. This is a crisis. This is an emergency. And so for the full DNC to simply continue plodding along, meeting twice a year seems, to put it mildly, very inappropriate. Well, when you look at the bylaws of the Democratic National Committee, the national party, they say that in the interim, other than the full DNC, the power to have responsibility for, and that's a word, they're responsible for the conduct of the National Democratic Party is the executive committee. And they had not met since mid-December last year. So it was a gap of a bit more than 5 months until they had their scheduled meeting last Friday in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I have to say, I was shocked when I found out from Ken Martin, the director of, the chair of the full DNC, that the meeting was scheduled for 3 hours. I thought, you're going to fly a few dozen people, executive committee members responsible for the entire conduct of the Democratic Party into Little Rock, Arkansas, and they're going to meet for 3 hours? I didn't get it. But I was wrong. They didn't meet for 3 hours. They met for an hour and a half. And we were live streaming from Roots Action, from our Progressive Hub site, the live program of the executive committee. And I thought maybe they were just taking a break, but no, the gavel came down, it was done. So, we know the parable of the tortoise and the hare. I'm afraid this is a tortoise that is moving so slow in the midst of this crisis that we're just not showing up as a party. And this is extremely dangerous, to put it mildly.
What did they talk about for 90 minutes?
They talked about all the good work that the DNC is doing. They praised by name many of the staff members, many of the leaders, the chair and the vice chairs, of which there are several. There was a lot of self-adulation, frankly. There was talk about building infrastructure. There were vows to defeat Republicans. All good, but to put it mildly, insufficient. There was not one proposal. There was not one debate. There was not discourse or deliberation, because there was nothing to deliberate. There was nothing being done.
What are you calling on the DNC to do? What when you say a meeting, because I was with Rania, we were in just outside of Washington in February, and it was several days where they were electing officials. And I must tell you, I mean, Jim Zogby yesterday on my show said it was, an S show. And that's what it was. I mean, they were changing the rules in the middle of votes. There was confusion on the floor because I spoke in affirmation of his nomination for vice chair. He did not win, but he's someone who, he did not win a slot, but history is going to show that he is a winner because he's been fighting for reforms. He's been fighting for those who've been locked out to be let in. So God bless him. If he won a seat with the way they're handling things, I don't know if that's really a win, Norman Solomon, because this is ridiculous. I mean, this is the same group that decided that we're not going to have a primary system. I mean, what should they be doing in this emergency meeting? Does that mean you call all the DNC members in and meet like they did in February? I mean, how would that work?
Yeah, it means that all 448 would be called to have a in-depth meeting for days, not hours. It would mean that instead of simply meeting as they did in early February of this year, with the next scheduled full meeting for late August, there would be a recognition, not just with rhetoric, but with action, that this is an emergency. This is a constitutional crisis. The democracy itself, such as it has remained, is in threat. And I did do a memo because I was told that there was openness to an agenda, and I wanted to believe that, an agenda for the emergency meeting last Friday. So I sent proposals for a democracy summer or democracy fall, whatever the name would be, a democracy season where people around the country would be invited in, distributed organizing. When you do the math, with 450 or so members of the DNC, they could each take responsibility for about 750,000 population area, and the country could be divided. And we could have it divided in a good way, divided up, so that we could methodically reach out to virtually every community, door to door, virtually holding meetings, invitations. This is a different model. It's different than saying we're going to raise a lot of money and we're going to do a lot of ads and we're going to do a lot of messaging from the top. One of the points that I made to the chair is that when we're getting messages, and I saw them on YouTube from Kamala Harris in the last weeks, I've gotten them in the mail from Barack Obama, I've gotten them from Ken Martin, and you know what they say? They say, we want you to be involved, so send money. And that's the end of it. We want you to be involved, so send us money. And that's the end of the outreach. Well, that's not organizing. That's something else.
That's solicitation. That's, isn't it? I mean, that's it. I mean, it's, look, Ronnie, Patrice, I can hear your frustration. What is your frustration? I mean, because you've stayed in the fight, to be fair, and yet, you and Jim Zogby and Ariel Gold and all the outlaws, my team, you continue to get pushed up against the wall. I mean, what is the source of your frustration? What is it?
I mean, one quick point of clarification. I am a lifelong Democrat, but I'm not a DNC member or any way sort of like officially part of that infrastructure, but am a lifelong Democrat. And I think my frustration is it's the definition of insanity, right? To do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different outcome. And I don't, I was Bernie Sanders' deputy campaign manager in 2016. And the last thing in the world I ever want to do is relitigate 2016. But there are lessons that should have been learned from the 2016 general election. And yet, here we are again. Here we are again making the same mistakes. And that this self-flagellation that Norman's talking about is exactly what happened in the post-mortem after 2016. And here we and this is my frustration with Ken Martin. I'm going to tell you, I was holding out hope for him. He beat the establishment. We can have a whole conversation about that later. But he promised a DNC deep dive postmortem. That hasn't even started. And thank God for Norman and his crew, but there needs to be a come to Jesus among the powers that be in the DNC. And granted, there is a different leadership right now, and I get that, and I appreciate that. That doesn't mean they're doing anything differently. And also, I'm sorry to just plus what Norman is saying, because you're exactly right. What Norman's talking about is year-round organizing, not year-round fundraising, year-round organizing. And that doesn't mean we're canvassing at this or phone banking at the same levels we do when we're months out from election day, but it does mean engaging with people. And it's something that myself and many of us have been banging the drum on for so long. You cannot expect to flip a switch 6 or 8 or 9 months before an election and think everyone's going to drop everything and just jump in and be ready to go. That's one thing. Second thing is, tell me what the Democratic message is. Tell me what it is, aside from Donald Trump sucks, which we all know. Tell me what the message is. And if I hear one more time how horrible he is, we know how horrible he is. And I'm not saying we don't talk about that. But why are we different? What are we going to do that's different? And how are we going to center humanity in our party? Because frankly, that's my other frustration. Sorry to wax poetic on this, but my other frustration is I became a Democrat or identified as a Democrat from a very young age because I believed the Democratic Party was the party of humanity and decency and equity and collective liberation and protecting the planet. And oftentimes, and frankly, I'm going to piss a lot of people off with this. I'm sorry, not sorry, but there are things that Kamala Harris was saying on the campaign trail, Biden too, before her. If you put those statements side by side by Donald Trump, I wouldn't have known who said it. Whether we're talking about immigration or I mean, obviously I'm Palestinian. Every day I wake up being Palestinian. And yes, the vice president separated the slightest little bit from Biden on Palestine and Palestinian rights, but then went right back to the same old rhetoric. And not only the same old rhetoric, but then talking about the biggest, most powerful military in the world. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is not who we are. So I get exacerbated and I apologize for that, but it is wild frustrating to consistently be asking for sort of the core values to be recentered and being looked at like you're nuts for asking for it. And to your point too, Santita, about Biden saying he was going to be the transitional candidate. I was calling for him to not run again, and I was called a bad Democrat, and I was, all the name calling in the world. Of course, when we got to the debate, and folks started speaking up, and then now we have the revisionist history we get from Matt Miller and Corinne Jean-Pierre and the rest. But it's endlessly frustrating.
But he's still upset about having been taken off of the ticket. He's still upset about that. Kamala Harris had a winning message with price gouging. It was the Democratic donors, the donor class, who told her to pull back. Dr. Zogby yesterday said he spoke with her and he told her, look, just go off script and tip your hat to ceasefire, to the Palestinian cause. She did it. She was wildly applauded in the room. They yanked her chain as soon as she got off the stage, the donor class again. I mean, Norman Solomon, who you solicit my money, but you need my votes. And you really need my votes more than you. Reverend Jackson showed you you can be a successful candidate with no money if you have the right message.
Right.
So help me to understand, what is this?
Well, you're reminding me that the first Democratic convention I went to, that was as a reporter in 1988, I heard Reverend Jackson say, it takes two wings to fly. But the people running the Democratic Party believe that that's not the case. And they want to bring people in to do the volunteer work, to get out the vote in ways that, frankly, the donor class can't do with all the ads that they pay for or fund. But they don't want people in the room around the table to be part of the discourse. And the polling was very clear last summer that if Kamala Harris would call for a ceasefire or call for an arms embargo on Israel until they stopped the killing of civilians in Gaza, that she would get more votes. This wasn't just hindsight. This was in real time last summer. And for the reasons that she will only know for sure, but that we can certainly guess, she opted not to do that. And this is the conventional wisdom of people who, sure, they want to win, but even more, they want to control the party. And they got control of the party, and the party went down in flames.
So we're looking at the DNC. Do we need to even be more targeted? I mean, do we have to begin to look at the donor class? Who are they?
Well, one example, and we have many listeners right now who I am sure know Ken Martin, because he's been a trailblazing chair of the DFL in Minnesota for many years. And he was not endorsed for chair of the DNC by Nancy Pelosi, by Hakeem Jeffries, by Chuck Schumer. They all endorsed his main opponent. And so he is not indebted to the power structure, but it appears that his caution leads us to conclude that he is afraid of them, because he's not stepping out, he's not stepping away, and he's conducting, as I said, business as usual at a time when that is simply virtual surrender to the right wing.
Do they not understand the state of emergency that Americans know that they're in? I mean, these were constituents, Americans, because I don't know how they voted. These were Americans at Senator Ernst's town hall, because quite frankly, Republicans, Democrats, and people who didn't vote are going to these town hall meetings because they all are afraid. They are. More than 40% of America's kids are born on Medicaid or using Medicaid. You need it. We all need, we've been talking about universal single payer for years. I mean, in the Western world, white women are facing a death sentence trying to have a baby. The Black women, absolutely, we have the worst maternal mortality. It's horrible for everybody, for example. So do they not understand that the people whom they purport to represent are desperate, are increasingly desperate, Norman Solomon? I
I
mean,
think a concise answer is that the prevailing view of those who are at the top of the National Democratic Party is that just as they claimed in 2016 falsely, in 2020 squeaked through, 2024 falsely predicted again, they believe that Donald Trump's insanity and lies and lack of character, to put it mildly, would sink him, would bring him down. So they're in an attitude, well, he's basically going to shaft and bring himself down. And that is a complete lack of belief in grassroots organizing in ways that really matter, to give people an affirmative vision to fight for.
what they don't understand is that Chicago, a reliably Democratic city, is turning red, particularly in the Black community. They're not looking at the demographics, Norman Solomon and Ronnie and Patrice. Donald Trump has effectively broken the duopoly. That's something that Bernie Sanders did, quite frankly, in 2016. It's broken and it's not going to come back. You're going to have to get the independents. That's real now. I mean, we were in Washington. They were, and Ronnie, we talked about this. Norman, they didn't mention immigration. That is a flashpoint in Chicago. And all around and in Los Angeles and New York, every place you go. They didn't talk about that. They want to talk about these cultural issues. That is not what's on people's minds. And right now, they dismantle the Social Security system. So the people who are back at Social Security are telling you that we can't get the checks to people. We can't answer the phone calls. There are not enough of us here. Help me. I'm not hearing any of the Democratic leadership speak to that. And is that what you want to hear at the emergency meeting? I mean, what is that what we're looking to have at the emergency meeting? No.
Well, I want to say what Rania has described to us, I think, is absolutely on point, really crystal clear. And symbolically, and I'm sorry to say this, when the executive committee members flew in for the meeting last Friday in Little Rock, they arrived at and I'm not making this up, folks, the Bill and Hillary Clinton National Airport in Little Rock. That is a symbol. That is a symbol of a neoliberal model that says we will let corporations do their thing. Let's remember who coined the phrase, the era of big government is over. That was President Bill Clinton. And now we're seeing the results of that kind of mentality.
And NAFTA. I mean, look, I love Bill Clinton on a personal level. I had a lot of disagreements with him politically, but I still sang the national anthem at his inauguration in 1997 and was proud to do it. That having been said, why Little Rock? Why not Chicago? Why not Jackson, Mississippi? Why not Atlanta? Why not? Why not Detroit? There are so many places that are flashpoints. Minneapolis. You've got Klobuchar, you've got Ilhan Omar, you've got Walt, you've got all these people. Come to Minnesota. George Floyd. These are flashpoints. Why would they go to Little Rock? Was Walmart the sponsor? I'm not being facetious here. I'm trying to get into the thinking, Rania, because they're leaving their base cold and they are hemorrhaging them. Donald Trump got more people of color.
And many of us have told him that.
So what is the response when you tell them that? Crickets? What?
So it's during the campaign, I will say, and I know you and I have talked about this, but during the campaign, when I and others would say, you are hemorrhaging support from your base, you're not going to make it up from running around the country with Liz Cheney and tacking to the right. It was, oh no, but our numbers, but our internals, which we all know you can make polls say whatever you want them to say. We know that. And we also know that they were not paying attention to what was happening on the ground, because what then happened when we got a few weeks outside of election day and senior staff started disseminating into these battleground states, I'm telling the stories now. I was getting calls one at a time from these battleground states going, "Oh my God, we're in trouble." And I was like, seems like somebody told you that. But the problem is when you're so beholden to the donor class and to a poll telling you what you want to hear, and that is what you base an entire strategy on. And then I think I will go to my grave believing that there, of course, were the bad actors who were Biden people who wanted to see the vice president fail,
Wait a
who
minute.
were in her orbit.
Say that again. There were who?
There were Biden people, members of the Biden team, who the vice president inherited. Granted, she had to say yes. She was the name at the top of the ticket, so I'm not going to take that agency away from her. But still, she inherited from the Biden team, and I will believe till the end of days that they had no good intention for her.
He
that they
told
wanted
her.
to see.
He called her
Absolutely.
and said, "No daylight, kid," before she
Yeah.
had her big debate. What? He was her boss. Are you serious?
Yeah.
What was she
Yeah.
supposed to do? Everybody said, "Oh, well, what she should have done was gone rogue." What? His people were flying her plane. His people were running her campaign. They had isolated, according to reports, her closest allies. She was alone. I'm not making excuses for her. I'm just saying all the books, Norman and Rania, they're coming out now and they're telling the story, and the story is ugly. Because it seems as if that internally these people did not want her to win, Rania. I don't want to move off that point. Because
I
they did everything they
actually
could
said
to
that
undermine her.
publicly. I said it publicly that I it seemed very, because I had the thought in my brain and it seemed conspiratorial. And then eventually in the midst of the campaign, I was like, he does not want her to win. They do not want her to win. And we hear this, we know this. Yeah, we've worked around politics long enough. There's always beef between the president and the vice presidential teams. It's always a thing.
Yeah.
But to literally tank our country, and every community in this country is under attack now, and understanding what it meant to have the Project 2025 was the playbook. They were out front about it. It was not a secret. And to know all of that and still go, I'm going to get mine. I'm mad. My whatever egos are in the way. And it is a special brand of depravity and disgusting actions that I frankly, I don't wish bad things on people, but I hope those people never work in politics ever again. And I know Jim, I always joke that I'm the good kind of consultant. Jim's always down on the consultant class, understandably. So I'm just telling on myself here. I am a consultant. It's okay though. We're not all bad. But that's the reality. It is about, where are my dollars coming from, and how can I watch out for myself? It's never about the greater good. It's never about the country. It's never about humanity. It is about self-interest.
Yeah, but see, there are consultants and there are consultants. The consultants who ran the campaign were making millions of dollars off the campaign. Let's keep it 100. Yeah. Because when you do the postmortem, Norman, hey, because I'm not new to this. I'm true to this. Because that's one of the things that we learned. We understood that we didn't even know that politics was a business. We walked out of the 84 campaign like completely shell-shocked. And my roommate at the time in college, because I was in college, was one of the Mitchell family members. Who are they? They're probably the most prominent Black family in American politics in the last 100 years. Her grandfather co-authored the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act. That's Clarence Mitchell Jr., the 101st senator. When you see LBJ opening his library just before he died, the Black couple who's sitting next to them, Those are her grandparents. Her great uncle, Perrin Mitchell, senior statesman of the Black Caucus. Her father, state senator. Her uncle, state senator. Her other uncle, state representative. And I can just keep on going because that's where they're that deep in. She told me going in, she said, "This is the nastiest business you can imagine." I said, "Oh, no." She said, "No, no, no, no. See, we've lived together a few months and our fathers have worked together. They've had their ins and outs. But you know what? As I've gotten to know you, I see your father's a real daddy. I respect that." I said, "Okay." She said, "No, no, no, really. Because, if the phone's ringing at 5 or 6 in the morning, it's your father or mine. Got it." She said, "But I don't think you really understand all that's in this." And oh my gosh, a year later, well, 9 months later, my mind was blown. That's why I think it's important what you're saying, Rania. The people who were pulling against her, because the party was pulling against him. Now, this is someone who's registered more people to vote than any person in the history of the Republic. You don't want those votes? Norman Solomon. When you do the postmortem, you've got to put that in there.
For sure. Yeah, we tend to, and I think your point is great, that for a lot of folks, it is a career, it's a business. In the Tapper Thompson book, Original Sin, there's a passing reference to when Mike Donnellan, who was really responsible in the White House for shielding, protecting, and deceiving to President Biden, keeping polls from him or spinning them in a certain way.
Yeah.
When he decided he wanted to leave the apparatus, he asked for $4 million. I mean, that was sort of his parachute out, his goodbye gift. And I remember being at the Unity Reform Commission of the DNC in 2017, and Jen O'Malley Dillon was the chair. And then she went on to be deputy chief of staff in the Biden White House. Then she went on to de facto run the Biden campaign and de facto run the Kamala Harris campaign for 107 days. And she was, to put it mildly, not a champion of transparency or reform. She was basically put in that Unity Reform Commission chair seat by the Clinton forces. And a lot of people, well, let's put it this way. If there's more than $1 billion with a B dollars raised and spent in a few months, there's a lot of big pockets being filled.
$4 million from whom? What did you do?
$1 billion with a B in less than 4 months, and they were still in debt. Sorry, this part gets me
It's mind blowing.
Yes. Sorry, go ahead, Norman. Apologies.
No, it's just, well, it's the funnel. There were interviews at the end of the election campaign, people in Philadelphia who couldn't get campaign material from the Harris campaign. And meanwhile, huge quantities are TV ads. These are folks who get a percentage, 20% or whatever, if the ads happen. If the TV ads don't happen, they don't get their 20%. Why would they actually spend money on grassroots organizing?
I'm speechless, but I think that people need to understand, Norman and Rania, how this works. So when you have the DNC that refuses to rally the troops, you see that there are lots of people who really are locked into it's their business and they're protecting it. In the meantime, they have a big television show that used to be a convention because now it's a TV show. When you walk onto the convention floor, when you walk in the room, you clear that it's a soundstage. You don't discuss anything at these Democratic conventions anymore. There's no debate. There's no floor fight. There's nothing. And you saw what happened at the convention. Someone had a Palestinian flag and they were attacked at the convention. I said, wait, no one would attack you if you were holding an Israeli flag. What is this? No one's talking about this. This is insane. And you talked about nothing. And yet they engage in this self-congratulation. In the meantime, people, when you look at Washington Journal in the morning on C-SPAN, people are pleading with the Democrats to fight for them.
Yeah.
When you go to these town hall meetings, they're saying, "What are you doing?" I mean, now Democrats are going to they're getting assailed, attacked. Well, really assailed, not attacked, but they're being confronted at their town hall meetings. The DNC, do they not understand do they not see what's happening out here?
Well, when you're afraid of your base, you have a weak party. And the leaders at the top of the Democratic Party nationally are afraid of their base. Here's one example. In mid-March, the top Democrat in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, voted for the Trump spending bill. And Democrats across the country at the grassroots were outraged. As it happened, he was scheduled to go on a national tour to blue states, blue cities, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and so forth. And he was so afraid of Democrats showing up and challenging him that he canceled the entire tour. And that's a big deal. It was for his book. When you have a book come out, that's a multi-year process. And the culmination is your book tour. So in mid-March, abruptly, suddenly, his entire speaking tour around the country is canceled. And 2.5 months later, it hasn't been rescheduled. Why? Because Chuck Schumer is afraid of Democrats who vote. He wants to stay in his bubble. And ironically, his book is about anti-Semitism, but he's someone who is fueling the mass murder in Gaza. And he won't listen to the people individually or the polls, Democrats and the population at large of this country, who is saying overwhelmingly, stop sending the weapons for genocide.
But he, and
And
you saw what
I
just
want to.
happened.
Can I just?
Yeah.
Oh, so I just want to put again a finer point on what Norman's saying, because I think it's so important because of this failure of our elected leadership at the federal level. Hakeem Jeffries is equally horrible. I'm sure everybody saw, or if you didn't, look it up. Just a few days ago, when Jerry Nadler's staffer was handcuffed, a Hill staffer was handcuffed, and Jeffries' response is, "We're going to respond in a time and place where I mean, my God." And then you have Chuck Schumer essentially egging Donald Trump on to go to war with Iran. This is our federal leadership. And so they're scared, not because the Democratic base has lost their minds. They're scared because, just like Norman said, they're not listening. They're not showing up. And Schumer has done everything from saying, "Oh, we're not quite to a constitutional crisis yet. Oh, we're not quite in a crisis of democracy yet." I mean, my God, what is it going to take? And this is our leadership. So of course this is like, we're not being hyperbolic here. This is life or death. People are already dying. And we have the leaders of our party tap dancing around and playing this little patty cake game and refusing to show up. And my God, step aside, sir. Jeffries and Schumer, if you are not up for the task, which to me and to many other people out there, you're not, step aside, because this is not the time for people without a backbone. This is not the time for people who aren't ready to step in and push back.
Or who aligned with other interests, because he just had a horrific showing at his book event at the New York City Library last week. Did you see that? Maybe a third, almost a half of his audience individually stood up and started shouting him down about Gaza.
And that's his hometown. I mean, you're talking New York.
On 34th Street, the New York City Public Library.
Wow.
And it started off nicely enough. And one by one, he couldn't even get through the event because people were let out one by one. And he had no reaction. I said, how are you going to lead the party when you have no reaction? But that's consistent here with the DNC. I see a refusal. I mean, what can Ken Martin do? What would you suggest? What would you
Well,
recommend?
there's a hell of a lot he could do. And it's important because so many listeners, as I alluded to briefly before, you know Ken Martin, you know about him. He's a Minnesota stalwart. He's going to maybe care about what you say. Text him, call him, email him, let him know that this is not acceptable to simply do the same old stuff because that's been done before. If you're a reform candidate, get with it and reform. And what they can do, yes, Progressive Democrats of America and Roots Action have a petition going for an emergency meeting of the entire DNC. And the fact is that the chair can call a meeting right away. It's in the power of the chair of the DNC to do that. He doesn't have to ask anybody else. He could declare Democracy Summer. He could declare Democracy Fall. He could spend millions of dollars with materials for people to go door to door, to do events, give them the resources for distributed organizing. He's not doing that, and we should tell him to do it.
When you say Democracy Summer, because here we are, and we are going and these Donald Trump wants his big beautiful bill on his desk by July 4th, right? And I'm finding that the bill can remain intact, but what those people who are MAGA allied, what they will do is go to him and visit him individually and get carve-outs, so their districts will be safe. But if you don't have an in, you can't get a carve-out.
Right.
So here we go. And I think what is unsettling, Norman, is that, and Rania, they know how this goes. They know how this works. Yeah. And still they do nothing.
And I think it's especially upsetting because, according to decorum, which what is that anymore? If there was a Democrat in the White House, the DNC takes its cues from the White House.
Right.
We do not have the White House. We don't have the Senate. We don't have the House. Our leadership is an abject failure. So that's where, to me, I'm like, if ever, to Norman's point, if ever there was a time for the DNC to be like, we're done waiting for our cues because they're not coming, and the cues that are coming are just mind-blowingly terrible. If ever there was an open door and a time to say, we're stepping in and we're leading and we're actually going to be the head of this party, my God, isn't it right now? Isn't it now? If not now, when? Like this, and I'm afraid what tends to happen with the DNC is like, oh, well, we're supposed to, so we don't have the White House, but we have leadership in the House and Senate. They're terrible. Ken knows they're terrible. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for?
Well, that's a key point, because right now, the power of the DNC chair is potentially enormous. And usually that's been a bad thing, because whether it's Tom Perez taking orders from Obama, or whether it is Jamie Harrison taking orders from Biden, that's a stultifying dynamic. But the flip side is now there's really no impediment for Ken Martin except his internalized conformity.
Yeah. So what do we? So you're saying I need marching orders now, because I think that people are beginning to get more of a sense, and I think we have to continue to come back on this show and other shows to let people know what the internal dynamics of the party are, because people don't know what the DNC. Well, first of all, let me back up. I should have asked you this at first. Who are the DNC? What is the DNC, Norman and Rania? Help me. What is it?
Well, there's a one might say convoluted, but just for a multi-dimensional system that streams into who is put on the committee. I know in California, it's through the state Democratic Party, their elections. Then there are the vice chairs of the DNC who are elected. They're automatically on the executive committee. But long story short, there are several tributaries that lead into who are those 448 people. They're generally establishment Democrats because they come out of state structures that are establishment. That said, people can fight to get on. There are a few really progressive people, but they're vastly outnumbered on the DNC.
Rania?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's exactly right. It is very much an establishment structure that puts, for the most part, these 448 people into place. There are at-large members too that tend to be elected outside of that infrastructure, but it's still a very establishment process. That being said, just like Norman said, there have been successful attempts to step in and win these seats as progressives. And I think that's great, but also just like Norman said, they're wildly outnumbered. If I was going to give marching orders, I tell this, it's not a funny joke. Santita, I know you've heard me say it. It's not funny at all, but rarely does a politician wake up deciding they're going to do the right thing. We have to force them. I believe the same thing about the DNC and the DS and the D-TRIP. All of these powers that be, these like umbrella infrastructures, we, the people, have to force their hands. We have to make it so untenable for them to be spineless cowards that they have no choice but to meet us where we are. Because let's be real and let's be honest, Democrats haven't met people where they are in several cycles now. And if I can overly simplify it, it is that we have to demand and force their hands that they meet us where we are and they meet this moment. Because my God, if we've learned anything since November, they're not going to do it on their own. So
Well, they have.
That's exactly right. And I think one of the many steps that would be very valuable is I'd love to see Ken Martin on the Santita Jackson show. That would be fascinating.
Ooh. Yeah.
Well,
yes.
let's, you know what? I will reach out to him, and you know what? Let's pressure him to do that. Because the thing is, look, I want people. My father opened up his 84 speech. He said, "My constituents are restless and they seek relief."
Yeah.
Yes.
And I remember when my father decided that, we had come to the end of this presidential run in '88, he turned to my mother and he said, "Jackie, honey, we have made our point. We have put the issue of poverty on the table. We've brought the Palestinians to the table while talking about Israeli security, because that's important. They're married to each other. We talked about Appalachia. We talked about the Mississippi Delta. We talked about Haiti. We talked about South Africa. We got to get Mandela and Sisulu and everybody free. We have brought up these issues and more. And now we have made our point, and now we got to go home. It took us 20 more years to hear the rhetoric, and then another 20 more years to see the reality of policy with Bernie Sanders."
Yeah.
Because we really, there's a direct bridge from Reverend to Bernie. Bernie came out of the Jackson campaign, and you see that spirit, and that spirit is what carries the Democrats through. I'm not talking about my father. I'm talking about Norman Solomon and Jeff Cohen, who confronted the New York Times in the '88 campaign cycle because their reportage was so awful. It was so misleading. They said, "Enough. We have followed you." And I'm glad that the New York Times sat down with you. We were shocked because we heard about this while we're campaigning. We're like, "What have they done?" They were like, "No, we've got this." And I think we have to do that. Because now, Norman Solomon, people looked at you and Ruth Action. You and Jeff Cohen were the blasphemers. How dare you? You're not a good Democrat. You really want Trump to win, don't you? You have to begin every statement with a caveat, "I'm not a Trumper." Why? Why can't I look at the party uncritically? What is this?
The irony is those who were trying to prevent the party from going down in flames by running for re-election Joe Biden, those of us were accused of somehow endeavoring to do things that would help Trump. And yet it's the people who covered up what was going on in the White House, who deceived, who made excuses, who really, frankly, often lied about his condition in the White House. rather than making it easier to defeat Trump, they ultimately made it a disaster. They made it more difficult to defeat Trump.
They put.
I have to drop, but I want to say goodbye. So much love. Oh, go ahead.
What do you want to say before you go?
I mean, too many things, but really just repeating what I just said, that it is, no one's coming to save us. And if we sit back and wait, we're all going to be in bigger trouble than we already are. So now is the time to remember what collective liberation means. It's all of our freedom, rights, liberation is intertwined. And if we don't lock arms right now and demand what we want, and demand centering of humanity and planet and decency, I think we're going to be in even, it can get worse. That's the thing. It absolutely can get worse. And so if anybody is listening to my last point is just, please, let's lock arms. Let's come together. Let's demand what we want.
Norman Solomon, Ronnie Patrice, sending you much love. Norman Solomon, your final statement, marching orders, because I think that those of us who are in the media have a responsibility. Well, certainly those of us who are independent, I can say that, to tell the truth and to speak for the people. I mean, that's what we're trying to do here. I think of the person in the crowd last week who shouted out, "People will die," and my heart broke. I said, okay, Democrats, this is where you come in. At least this is where they should come in. What's next, Norman Solomon?
Well, it's the culture of death that is being propounded, boosted, lionized by the right wing right now. I mean, that is a perfect, sad, terrible metaphor when the response is from someone, well, we'll all die. That's a kind of a vicious, destructive nihilism that we need to completely renounce. And the counterpoint is that we affirm life, that we organize, that we realize that nothing of value has been handed down from those at the top of the power pinnacle. It's always been because people love each other, they care about each other, they're willing to organize on that basis. That's the history of the country that is glorious. And that's the kind of history we need to create.
And we can do it. Well, the DNC, they need a meeting, and they need it before August. It's an emergency, everybody. If you don't think it's an emergency, what do they say? The depression is when the recession is when your neighbor loses a job. The depression comes home when you lose the job. Yeah. It shouldn't have to come home into your house. It's an emergency for everybody. Increasingly, Americans need Social Security. That's being taken away from them. Medicare and Medicaid, that's being taken away. WIC programs. Now they even have a campus program. We're talking about that. CCAMPIS. This is the program, Norman Solomon, that funds parents who have children to go to college. That in this big, beautiful bill, that's being eliminated.
The countless ways that this administration is causing death, destruction, and misery, nobody can keep up because it's being done in so many ways. And rather than fatalism, we need to just be realistic and determined, because we can, as you're saying, we can turn this around. It's a long process. There's no overnight anything. This is not instant solution. This is about changing history from the ground up.
And we can do it.
Yeah.
Oh, Norman Solomon, it is one of the great joys and honors of my life to have your friendship and to have your mentorship and to have you be a leading light for me. And I thank you so much. Thank you so much for this work.
Well, you are a leading light on the airwaves and everywhere else. So a big solidarity hug to you with so much appreciation.
Sending you so much love. Let's work together and push for an emergency meeting. We have to start calling the people that we know and reach out to Ken Martin, everybody, on AM 950 radio. He's right here in Minnesota. We should let him know that we support him. You don't have to attack him. Let him know, let us help us to help you.
Yeah.
Because if you want to win, you can win. And should the Democrats take over the House of Representatives in 2026, then you can force Hakeem Jeffries to be the speaker that you need him to be. And you can make all of these people, Republican and Democrat, do the things that you need them to do. Trust me. Elon Musk is gone because you said that he had to go. He didn't leave because he wanted to go. He left because you, the people, made it politically untenable for him to stay. That's the power that you have. Think about that, everybody. Think about that. We have the power to make the Democrats have an emergency meeting because it indeed is an emergency for all of us. Norman Solomon and Roots Action, everybody. Go to rootsaction.org. They need your support as they support us. Go to fair.org. Support them as they support us. And come to the Rainbow Convention, June 12th, 13th, and 14th. We got a lot we're going to be talking about. And we want to be talking about these things with you. The Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. God bless.